The final part of this lecture on sovereignty looks at the potential benefits of sharing sovereignty via EU membership. To evaluate this argument, what I want to do is examine what Barack Obama said about why the UK should stay in the EU. Remember that his words caused a stir, as shown in the clip of Boris Johnson that we saw earlier. The controversy arose because Obama was saying that pooling sovereignty is a good idea. Now, here's a key passage from Obama's article published in the Telegraph on the 23rd of April, in which he's making the case for why Britain should remain in the EU. And I'll let you just read that for a few seconds. The key comment here is the idea that it is through collective action that today's challenges can be met. And what this comment suggests, I think, is that instead of seeing the EU as taking control away from British decision makers, it is actually a way to multiply British influence. This interpretation is inherently connected to the idea that there are numerous 21st century policy problems that cannot be solved unilaterally. In his article, for instance, Obama gives examples such as the nuclear deal with Iran and the Paris Climate Change Agreement to show that being at the negotiating table as part of the EU allows the UK to have a bigger say in world affairs. That's this idea then, 21st century problems can't be solved unilaterally. And that's a strong, positive message to make, and it matches the slogan, Britain stronger in Europe, that is used by the Remain side. But this argument, I think, raises two fundamental questions. The first is, how many issues really fit this model of being problems that the UK alone cannot resolve? That's one question. The second question is, well, how good is the track record of the EU in actually pooling sovereignty to produce collective solutions? Now, I don't have authoritative answers to these questions, I'm sorry to say. But that's why I think they're ideal topics for debate in the discussion board and in the live Q&A on this week's theme that will follow. For now, my last word on the subject of sovereignty concerns the negative argument for staying in the EU, the one I think that Obama only acknowledges implicitly. What I'm referring to here is the idea that the UK would suffer, notably economically, if it was outside the EU. In this sense, the trade-off involving sovereignty is less about maximizing British influence than about enhancing prosperity. And this supposed link between the EU and British economic well-being is probably the most controversial aspect of the whole referendum debate, and it's going to keep coming up again and again in this course. And here, in fact, is an image put out by the Remain campaign that perfectly illustrates this message. It's making the case for staying in the EU on the basis of what it would cost to leave, using different reports focusing on different costs of Brexit. And the numbers look scary indeed. But I don't want to get bogged down in the clash over the accuracy of forecasting the potential costs of Brexit, because no one knows the future for certain. Instead, I think it's more important to highlight why this argument is essential to the Remain camp. Basically, by putting economic issues at the forefront of the debate, the hope is to overcome British voters' concerns about transferring sovereignty. Now to conclude, it might disappoint you to learn that I do not intend to provide a definitive evaluation of the risks of Brexit right now. That's actually the topic of the final lecture. I just want, at the moment, to use the heated question of economic risk to conclude by highlighting a fundamental paradox about sharing sovereignty, because that's been the theme for this week. The paradox is that the UK definitely gives up control by being inside the EU. However, as a member state, the UK gains the power to shape EU policy in its own interest. The key arena for this trade-off is the single market, because that's the core of EU policy making and is going to be the subject of the next lecture. So we'll have to continue the discussion of sovereignty, in effect, by looking at what it means for the UK to be a member of the single market. Thank you for listening. Please contribute to the discussion board and don't forget to complete the quiz covering this week's topic.